Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the country will move towards a smart lockdown as an indefinite one is not an option. At a telethon, Khan says small and the medium businesses will be allowed to open, but the government will stay vigilant to seal potential hotspots. Pakistan has reported 224 deaths among over 10,500 coronavirus cases, with more than 2,300 recoveries. The number of coronavirus cases in South Asia has crossed 37,000, with more than half in India. Until now, the region has suffered fewer infections than rich Western nations. But that could be the result of lower testing rates, which experts believe may allow the virus to lurk undetected. This has complicated the task of governments seeking to ease the lockdowns. However, Prime Minister Imran Khan has reaffirmed that his priority is to save people from starvation during the pandemic. Speaking at a fundraising telethon, he said everyone will have to contribute to defeat the disease. He went on to say that US President Donald Trump has assured him of his support in the fight against the disease. Earlier, Pakistan hosted a virtual conference of SAARC health ministers, wherein the South Asian nations agreed to jointly fight the pandemic. At the moot, Pakistan called for operationalizing the Health Technical Committee of the organization to deal with the coronavirus crisis. In the United Kingdom, the COVID-19 death toll has soared past 18,700 after the country recorded another 616 deaths in a day. Earlier, Spain recorded 440 new deaths in the last 24 hours, bringing the country's overall total to more than 22,000. However, the US continues to be the epicenter of the pandemic, which has claimed more than 47,000 lives. Globally, the virus has killed over 184,000 people, with almost 2.6 million cases of infection. What in this report?
Countries across the world are retreating on lockdown measures and forced to contain COVID-19. But there is fear that lifting movement restrictions too soon will lead to a spike in infections. In a dramatic shift of stance, the biggest decrier of lockdowns, US President Donald Trump criticized Georgia's decision to lift restrictions. Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres has warned against the use of COVID-19 restrictions to peddle repressive authoritarian agendas.
Against the background of rising ethno-nationalism, populism, authoritarianism, and the pushback against human rights in some countries, the crisis can provide a pretext to adopt repressive measures for purposes unrelated to the pandemic. This is unacceptable. More than ever, governments must be transparent, responsive, and accountable.
Although China has reported no new COVID-19 deaths for 8 days in a row, the rising number of asymptomatic cases in the country remains a threat. In the UK, Foreign Minister Dominic Raab has warned that the second wave of coronavirus cases will pose an even greater risk. The government says full restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks and levels of social distancing for much longer.
We have to be very realistic that if people are hoping that it's suddenly going to move from where we are now in lockdown suddenly into everything's gone, that is a wholly unrealistic expectation. We're going to have to do a lot of things for really quite a long period of time.
Turkmenistan, one of the few nations in the world that has reported no cases of the coronavirus, has insisted its official data is true and it is not hiding anything.
China has once again rejected US allegations that Beijing covered up the novel coronavirus outbreak. Speaking in London, Chinese envoy Liu Xiaoming said the US must stop bullying the people of China. He said China notified the world about the outbreak without delay and built a strong line of defense for global public health. Liu said politicizing the virus will only undermine international cooperation against the pandemic. US President Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized China over its handling of the coronavirus outbreak. China also announced an additional $30 million grant for the WHO days after the US froze funding for the global health body. The grant will be in addition to $20 million provided by China earlier to the WHO. China says Australia's call for an independent probe into the coronavirus epidemic was political maneuvering. The Foreign Ministry said Australia should end its ideological bias. Australia's push for an independent review of the origins and the spread of the pandemic, including the response of the WHO, has drawn sharp criticism from China. Beijing has accused Australian lawmakers of taking instructions from the U.S. Foreign Ministry. Spokesman Gang Shuang said China has no wildlife wet markets. He was responding to a question about the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's comments calling for China to close all wildlife wet markets in the country. Gang said so-called independent probe interferes with the international cooperation on epidemic prevention and will not be welcomed. Pakistan has strongly condemned the escalating systematic campaign of demonizing Muslims in India. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi says Muslims in India are facing increased exclusion as well as the threat of mob violence. In a weekly press briefing in Islamabad, Aisha Farooqi criticized government's RSS-inspired anti-Muslim policies. She said it is deeply disconcerting that the already persecuted and marginalized Muslims in India are becoming insecure amid COVID-19 outbreak. Talking about Indian-occupied Kashmir, Farooqi said Pakistan is concerned about increasing persecution of journalists in the valley. She pointed out that it is the 263rd day of the continued Indian oppression and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. In Afghanistan, the government has released another 55 Taliban fighters amid intensified clashes in the country. In a tweet, National Security Council spokesperson W.H.O said the inmates were released from 9 provinces. As of now, the Afghan government has freed nearly 500 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 60 security personnel. The two sides are required to release 6,000 prisoners as part of the Doha peace agreement. The prisoner swap is crucial for initiating the intra-Afghan talks expected to end the decades-long war in the country. Earlier, US President Donald Trump discussed the Afghan peace process with Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani over the phone. According to the White House, the two stressed the need to reduce violence in Afghanistan. Iran's military commander Hossein Salami says that Iran will destroy US warships if its security is threatened in the Persian Gulf. In an interview, Salami said he has ordered the naval forces to destroy any American force that commits aggression against Iran's ships. The Revolutionary Guards chief said the security of the Persian Gulf is part of Iran's strategic priority. Salami's remarks come after the US accused Iran of harassing its navy in the Gulf and threatened to target and destroy Iranian ships. Trump said he instructed the US Navy to fire on any Iranian ship that threatens American interests. Tensions between both the sides are high as Iran's 11 vessels came dangerously close to the US ships in the Gulf this week. Tehran considers US naval activity in the Gulf highly provocative and terms the patrol as adventurism. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Iran must be held accountable for launching the country's first military satellite into orbit. In a press conference, he said Iran's military, designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S., is behind the launch. Pompeo said every nation has an obligation to go to UN and evaluate if this launch was consistent with the UNSC resolutions. He said Washington has offered Tehran humanitarian assistance, but that offer was rejected. Pompeo said the U.S. also assisted other countries with delivering humanitarian aid to the Iranian people. In Libya, the UN-recognized Government of National Accord has launched an offensive against the forces of Khalifa Haftar in the south of capital Tripoli. In an interview, a GNA spokesman said the government forces have started an operation against Haftar's militia in the Al-Khalatat area. He said the GNA forces destroyed 3 armed vehicles of Haftar's forces and the fighting is continuing in the area. Government forces have been under attack by Haftar's militia since April 2019, with over 1,000 killed in the violence. The Libyan government launched Operation Peace Storm on 26th of March to counter attacks on the capital. The guarantor states of ASTANA process have reaffirmed their commitment to Syria's territorial integrity and political unity. The foreign ministers of Turkey, Russia and Iran held the 7th meeting on the latest situation in Syria via video conference. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, developments on the ground and the political process were discussed. It said the foreign ministers also shared thoughts on humanitarian situation and return of refugees. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu emphasized the need for the continuation of aid towards Syria via Turkey. He said the Idlib ceasefire agreement must be followed to ensure peace in the region. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said the meeting stressed to find a political solution to the crisis in Syria and fighting terrorism. A 2-week ceasefire in Yemen announced by the Saudi-led military coalition has expired without leading to a permanent truce. The move has raised fears that the country's war will continue, damaging its already limited capacity to take on the coronavirus. Diplomats had expected an extension of the ceasefire for at least another 2 weeks, if not until the end of Ramadan. But the coalition did not extend it after the Houthis refused to accept the ceasefire announcement and continued their attacks. In Iraq, hundreds of civil servants staged a protest in the Kurdish city of Suleimania demanding overdue wages. The protesters took to the streets after coronavirus-related movement restrictions were lifted. A protesting teacher said they have gathered here paying no heed to the virus but are afraid of starving to death. Last week, authorities eased lockdown measures in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan region, allowing essential businesses to open. However, large public gatherings are still not allowed. The Kurdistan region in northern Iraq has recorded over 300 COVID-19 cases with 4 deaths and nearly 300 recoveries. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says he will cancel all the agreements with the US and Israel if Tel Aviv annexes land in the occupied West Bank. In a televised speech, he said Palestine will not stay silent if any part of its land is annexed. This comes after US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the decision to annex West Bank rests with Israel. Pompeo said Washington will offer its views on this to the new Israeli government in private. He also welcomed the signing of coalition deal between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. Before signing the deal, Netanyahu and Gantz agreed to bring the vote on the West Bank annexation to the Knesset starting July. Israeli settlement activity is widely considered illegal as per the international law. Another session of the contact group on Ukrainian settlement for improvements in the Donbas region has failed. Speaking after the meeting, Russia's envoy Boris Gryzlov said the contact group held a video conference producing no result. Gryzlov said no agreements between Kiev and Donbas were achieved due to Ukraine's non-constructive attitude. He said the situation has been particularly difficult in the contact group's political and security subgroups. The Russian envoy said along the contact lines separating Kiev and Donbas, ceasefire violations are registered on a daily basis. He said Kiev is undermining a real opportunity to improve the situation in the region. Earlier, in an interview, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said he will resolve the Donbas conflict before his presidential term expires. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Health authorities in Middle Eastern countries have reported new cases and related deaths from the novel coronavirus. Saudi Arabia announced over 1,100 new cases, bringing the total number of infections in the kingdom to nearly 14,000. Here are the details.
Qatar recorded 623 new cases, with its total reaching 7,764. The UAE said it registered 518 infections, increasing the total to nearly 8,800. The Emirates recorded 91 recoveries and 4 fatalities, with its death toll reaching 56. Lebanon confirmed 6 new cases, taking its total to 688, Oman reported 102 new cases, bringing the total to 1,716 infected people. Iraq had over 1,600 infections, including 83 deaths and a total of 1,146 recoveries. The Iraqi Supreme Judicial Council announced that more than 20,000 detainees had been released so far as part of measures to curb the virus outbreak. Meanwhile, Middle East airlines are expected to lose $24 billion in revenue due to the coronavirus pandemic.
The WHO has warned world leaders that the coronavirus will be around for a long time. Speaking in Geneva, the WHO chief stressed the need to be cautious as most countries are still in the early stages of their epidemics. More in this report.
As the coronavirus cases continue to surge in parts of the World Health Organization has warned the outbreak is here to stay. WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus insisted that the outbreak was declared a global emergency at the right time. He said all nations should exercise extreme caution while reopening their borders when the pandemic begins to subside. Ghebreyesus said, although some countries see a decline in COVID-19 infections, the concern of resurgence still exists.
Most countries are still in the early stages of their epidemics, and some that were affected early in the pandemic are now starting to see a resurgence in cases. Make no mistake, we have a long way to go. This virus will be with us for a long time.
The WHO chief said he hopes the US will reconsider its suspension of funding, but Ghebreyesus said his main focus was on ending the pandemic and saving lives. He said the financial support for the WHO and its efforts worldwide is important for the own safety of the US.
For US to remain safe, the investment in other countries is very important. It's not just important for other countries, it is important for other countries that US supports, but at the same time, it's important for the US itself. So I hope the freezing of the funding will be reconsidered.
The global health body says it will keep investigating the animal origin of the coronavirus in cooperation with its partners. The body said it is important to understand where the virus came from to know how to prevent it in the future.
Well, Germany says it is still at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic and will have to live with it for a long time. Addressing the lower house of the parliament, Chancellor Angela Merkel said Germany has one time and is being used well to bolster the healthcare system. Calling the World Health Organization an indispensable partner, Merkel said Germany will continue to support the body's mandate. She said a vaccine for coronavirus must be affordable and available to everyone around the globe. Talking about the EU, Merkel said all efforts at national level can only be successful if Europe acts together. She said Germany will be ready to pay much more into the European Union budget for an economic program aimed at supporting an upswing in the next 2 years. 5 people have died while over a dozen are injured as severe storms ripped through the southern American states of Oklahoma and Texas. Rescue officials said 3 people died in the Texan city of Onalaska, while the other 2 were killed in southern Oklahoma. County officials in Texas said there was significant damage to residential, commercial, and public infrastructure. Officials said crews will start to canvass the path of the tornado to further assess the damage. The National Weather Service had timely issued a tornado warning for the several southeast Oklahoma counties. Authorities in the state say the timely warnings saved a lot of lives. Wildfires have been ripping through Poland's largest national park for the past 5 days. Around 6,000 hectares of the Bibza National Park are in flames as hundreds of firefighters attempt to bring the fires under control. In a statement, the Environment Ministry said the fire was most likely caused by farmers illegally burning grass. It said the combination of wind and drought made it very difficult to put out the fire. Park authorities said the losses this will cause for the wetlands wildlife is incalculable. They added the fire couldn't have been ignited by natural causes as it isn't summer.
This is a tragedy. It is human stupidity, but first and foremost, it is a gigantic tragedy. We have drought. Normally we would have wetlands. There would have been huge pools of water. The fire would have burned some marshes, but the water pools would have stopped it. Now I don't know when and where it would be stopped. It is possible that we would have to fight this fire for months to come. Not a week, not a few hours, but months. And this is what is most dangerous now.
The National Park of Libya is the largest habitat of marshland birds in Central and Western Europe and is also home to moose, auks and beavers. And now moving on, the coronavirus pandemic is likely to cause a 6% drop in carbon emissions this year, but the disease will likely be short-lived and will not stop the climate change. In a briefing, World Meteorological Organization Secretary General said the drop could be followed by even higher emissions growth than before the crisis. Petri Tellis said it is not even enough to get the world back on track to meet the target of 2015 Paris Agreement. He said if the same COVID-19 measures will be used to tackle the climate change, then the world would be more successful in solving this problem.
That's my hope, and my hope is also that once we invest money in the recovery from this economic crisis, that those money, at least part of that money, would be invested in climate smart solutions, that we could speed up the transition from fossil-based society towards climate-friendly society.
The W.H.O said a 7% annual drop in emissions will be needed to tackle the climate change. Now, moving on, Brazil's newly appointed Health Minister Nelson Teich says the country cannot survive under a long-term lockdown. Teich replaced Luiz Henrique Mandetta, who was fired by President Jair Bolsonaro over repeated disagreements regarding coronavirus containment strategy. Several weeks into the outbreak, Latin America has toughened up the response to the deadly pandemic. This report has the details.
Nations across the South American continent have taken drastic measures to combat the novel coronavirus as it threatens health and economy. While President Bolsonaro continues to downplay the pandemic threat, Brazil's state's authorities remain cautious about easing lockdown measures. Sao Paulo's Governor João Doria plans to gradually reopen from May 11th by relaxing some social distancing measures. Health Minister Teich also offered federal support to the governors, saying it was up to the states to do what is right for their region.
Gigante heterogêneo.
Brazil is huge and diverse. For things to be customized for different parts of the country, for different states and different regions, you have to take into account the number of new cases that could arise. Consider previous cases, the amount of hospital beds, what percentage of them are being used. The human resources angle, what has to be planned. One thing that is important is working between the health ministry, the states and municipalities. We can help precisely in this area of adapting, adjusting and calculating.
Meanwhile, Mexico has announced an increase in public spending of over $25 billion after showing restraint during the first weeks of the crisis. Chilean authorities have installed thermal imaging systems in hospitals to identify and treat employees early for potential infections. In Bolivia, doctors and nurses at El Alto's General Hospital protested over a lack of PPEs and medical supplies, including body bags for the dead.
We have a coronavirus death from this morning, which requires 2 bags to protect the cadaver and prevent the infection from spreading. We don't have body bags, the infection is spreading, and we continue to move around in here. We can't be asking for body bags every time someone dies. Going to the ministry and asking for bags, we can't do that. And now they're saying there are only 100 bags. What is the ministry preparing for?
In Uruguay, authorities have reopened 300 schools in the rural regions after a month-long closure, but the student attendance remains voluntary.
Well, the governments around the world are debating whether their countries should remain in lockdown or they should return to normal amid coronavirus. Meanwhile, in Sweden, schools and businesses are still open despite criticism from scientists and the international community. The country has racked up over 16,000 confirmed infection cases with more than 1,900 deaths so far.
Unlike other governments, Stockholm has resisted calls to lock the country down over recent weeks. Instead, it has opted for herd immunity. The strategy minimizes curtailment of liberties for the population while taking extra measures to protect vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, diabetics, and heart patients.
We have found ways. Had it been completely closed, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. We couldn't have made home deliveries. We couldn't have been able to take bags outside, which we are doing. Today, I have actually taken out grocery bags to 4 customers and helped them. And we kept the distance and greeted each other with our toes. And that has kind of worked.
Sweden's death toll is lower than Britain, France, and Spain. However, the other Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, took a much stricter approach and contained casualties. Meaning, despite having fewer deaths than Europe's worst affected countries, the herd immunity strategy still got Sweden the biggest death toll in the region. But officials are still defending the tactic.
We are not telling people to stay indoors. I think that's a very important part of our policy. On the contrary, people should go out, exercise, get fresh air. It's good for the physical and mental health.
Despite avoiding a lockdown, Sweden's export-dependent economy has also been hit hard and unemployment is rising. The government has launched a relief package worth $9.9 billion, but still expects the economy to shrink 4% this year.
In the US, stay-at-home orders caused by COVID-19 pandemic have threatened livelihood and the lifestyle of millions of people. But some people have opted to protest against the lockdowns. Others have come up with innovative ideas to get through the hard times. More in this report.
In New Orleans, when a pedicab operator and a street violinist realized about 5 weeks ago that they were at a loss due to lockdown, they took their show on the road to express themselves and also make some money in the form of tips. Their mobile music box is a rolling concert that wends its way through neighborhoods.
There hasn't been too much of a plan outside of, we gotta go out and do this. If we make money, awesome, because, that helps, certainly, but I think it was something that was definitely born out of love and probably has a bit of a life of its own. So there's no real plan except just to keep doing it and to be honest and to keep showing up and seeing, what it is that's needed.
In a city that typically throbs with live music, shuttered bars and the pin-drop quiet quarter have created a void. Strict limits on gatherings have cancelled concerts, second-line parades, and the Jazz and Heritage Festival. In such a time, locals say this small music activity breaks the monotony and is very uplifting.
It's amazing and uplifting, and live music is what we miss most right now, and it brings everyone out and makes everyone, feel like it's a beautiful day again.
Rosnoska and Grant try to pick a route each day. They go out to hit neighborhoods they haven't been to in a while. They accept tips, but more so the good vibes coming their way, and they also live stream their rides on Facebook.
In Brazil, thousands of square kilometers of the Amazon rainforest has been devastated by deforestation and wildfires. This phenomenon presents a significant threat as the Amazon's ability to absorb greenhouse gas makes it a bulwark against catastrophic climate change. Now, some groups in Brazil are trying to restore the rainforest by planting trees. Details on their effort in this report. The Amazon rainforest is the world's most biodiverse ecosystem and is home to thousands of species of plants and animals. But it has been devastated by wildfires and rising deforestation, a phenomenon that has worsened since Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro came to power. Some groups are trying to reverse the damage. This includes Rio Terra, which gives farmers seeds and teaches them how to plant native trees. The group has reforested hundreds of hectares of land.
With the implementation of the forest code and the need for wooden supply chains, this market becomes extremely interesting and could become an economical alternative for the Amazon, which is very valuable, which at the same time combats legal deforestation, generates job and income for the population, and helps to combat this issue of climate change.
Progetto Planta is another group working to save the Amazon. It has reforested more than 1,000 hectares so far and aims to save more than 1,000 family farms.
A implementação do código.
The Progetto Planter has already produced more than 1 million seedlings over these 2 years of the project. We have already recovered more than 1,000 hectares between legal reserves and permanent protection area in 15 municipalities in the state of Rondônia. The goal is to produce 2 million more seedlings to serve over 1,500 hectares and more than 1,000 family farms.
Ilson Guerra is one of the farmers who turned his future around with the help of these groups. With their help, he has learned to farm bananas and coffee on dry grassland.
Here was grass, but it didn't have any way of surviving. But not now. Now we are reforesting. Now we are planting the cultivated crops. In addition to that, they are all productive, some at a later date, but others are already producing, and we are getting our livelihood from that property.
Data shows deforestation in the Amazon has risen since last year. Environmental scientists warn if just a tenth of the remaining rainforest is destroyed, it will start a process that could release 200 billion tons of greenhouse gas. In Egypt, lanterns have been a local cultural symbol for Ramadan for generations. But this year, the Islamic holy month will be a subdued affair because of the COVID-19 lockdown. In an effort to create some festivity, two tailors determined to bring joy to children are making T-shirts with illuminating lantern printed on them. More in this report.
Ramadan is a special month for all Muslims. But this year, the worldwide lockdown has dampened celebrations. In Cairo, two tailors have made a T-shirt which they hope will bring joy to children in this difficult time. A small battery is attached to the T-shirt which lights up with the simple push of a button. The T-shirts are easily washable too.
Our kids, when they are not careful, can break toys very quickly. But now, the lantern is in a T-shirt. It is great and the kids love it. It is a new idea and protects the product too.
The tailors claim the lantern on the shirts is also more durable than a common lantern, which can be broken easily. These shirts are meant to be practical and cost-effective.
We have been holding the lantern in our hands for years. Since we were kids, we got used to the idea that lantern is meant to be held in a hand. We came up with a new idea of having a lantern on a T-shirt, and it was met with a nice feedback. A T-shirt lives longer than a lantern. If a lantern falls, it will break from the child. So we realized that the idea of T-shirt is much cheaper, with a great price for the consumer. We provide for all classes.
The workshop in Cairo produces 100 T-shirts per day, which are sold online. The product is also disinfected before delivery. To hold the spread of the coronavirus, Egypt has shut schools, universities, mosques, halls, and public gathering places. A nighttime curfew has also been imposed. Egypt has reported more than 3,000 cases of the virus, including 239 deaths.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Lows and the highs of the business world now. The US stocks ascended sharply after oil prices recovered more ground following a historic plunge. Oil jumped more than 30%, accelerating the recent rally amid rising US-Iran tensions. The bourses digested the latest US unemployment and earnings data. The latest data showed nearly 4.5 Americans filed for unemployment benefits in this week, down from over 5 million last week. The latest number was still high, that took the total in the past 5 weeks to a record 26 million as lockdown sparked staff furloughs. Chevron and ExxonMobil were the best performers in Dow Jones Industrial Average Index. The S&P 500 gained ground on the back of the strong energy stocks, while Nasdaq Composite also traded positively. European stocks have paused as data reveal the coronavirus lockdowns are causing unprecedented pain to the continent's services sector. The Stoxx Europe 600 SXXP edged up 0.1%. Germany's DAX index decreased 0.7%. Earlier stocks in Asia traded marginally higher as oil prices continue their overnight rebound, recovering some recent losses. Japan's Nikkei 225 has risen almost 1%, while the Topix index gained. Hong Kong's Hang Seng also rose by over 0.5%. South Korea's Kospi also edged 1% higher. German car manufacturer Mercedes-Benz has resumed engine production at its plant near Stuttgart city. The decision was taken after the government eased lockdown measures amid signs that Europe's largest economy is returning to normal. Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz, is gradually opening its plants in Europe. Speaking in Stuttgart, company's vice president Frank Dies said employees are required to wear face masks. He said the company had closed for 1 month lockdown and will increase production volumes steadily. Dies said Daimler has spread out shifts so that workers can no longer run into each other. Earlier, Germany approved the first clinical trials of the COVID-19 vaccine on humans. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.